Jackson Drake had never imagined anything like this could happen to him. He was just an ordinary engineer, living in a quiet, almost forgotten town on the edge of civilization. The day had been like any other, long hours in his small workshop, tinkering with machines and figuring out new ways to make life easier for people. But as the evening sun began to sink, painting the sky in fiery reds and oranges, something extraordinary happened. It started with a strange hum that vibrated through the ground beneath his feet. At first, Jackson thought it was just the wind or maybe some nearby construction, but the sound grew louder, until it was impossible to ignore. His eyes darted to the sky, searching for the source of the noise. He could hardly believe what he was seeing. A brilliant light appeared in the sky, swirling like a storm cloud made of pure energy. For a brief moment, it seemed to tear the sky itself open, revealing a dark rift in the atmosphere. Then, out of the rift, something incredible descended. A spacecraft, sleek and shining with silver light, cut through the air and landed silently in the clearing outside Jackson's workshop. The craft was unlike anything he'd ever seen, far too advanced for anything on Earth. It almost looked as if it were made of liquid metal, shifting and reflecting the light around it. Jackson stood frozen in place, his heart racing with a mix of fear and awe. The ship's hatch opened, and out stepped a figure. She was tall and strikingly beautiful, her features delicate yet strong. Her skin shimmered like polished marble, and her long, flowing hair cascaded down her back in waves of silvery blue. Her eyes, a deep shade of violet, glowed faintly in the dimming light. She wore a suit that seemed to be woven from light itself, a blend of shimmering silvers and soft blues that made her look almost ethereal. "Hello, Earthling," she said, her voice soft but carrying a weight of authority that sent a chill down Jackson's spine. "I am Lyra of Syra, and I need your help." Jackson's mouth went dry, and his mind struggled to process what was happening. He opened his mouth, but no words came out. The last thing he expected to see today was an alien standing in front of him. But here she was, as real as the ground he stood on. Lyra didn't wait for him to find his voice. "I come from a world beyond your stars," she continued, her gaze intense, but not unkind. "A great danger is approaching, one that threatens all of existence. I have traveled across the galaxy to find someone who can help us, someone with the potential to stop it." Jackson could hardly believe his ears. He had heard the stories, of course, the ones about UFO sightings and alien encounters. But he always thought they were just that, stories. Now, standing before him was proof that something far more unimaginable was happening. Before Jackson could say anything, Lyra stepped forward, her hand glowing faintly with a strange energy. "You are not like the others," she said, almost as if she were speaking to herself. "I sensed your potential. You are the one who can stop this." Suddenly, Jackson felt a pull deep within him, a strange sensation, like an invisible force drawing him toward her. It was unlike anything he had ever felt before, a kind of energy that seemed to stir something inside him that he didn't even know existed. He stumbled back, his heart racing faster, but Lyra's eyes never left him. "We don't have much time," she said urgently. "The fate of your world, as well as mine, is at stake. Come with me. The universe needs you." Jackson hesitated, the weight of her words sinking in. But before he could make a decision, Lyra raised her hand, and in an instant, everything around him seemed to blur. The ground beneath his feet vanished, the air around him shimmered, and within seconds, Jackson was no longer standing in his quiet town. He was somewhere else, somewhere far, far away. As he looked around in a daze, the last thing he could think was this: his life was never going to be the same again. Jackson's head spun as he tried to understand what was happening. One moment he was standing in his quiet town. The next, he was aboard a spacecraft speeding through the stars. The walls of the ship were smooth, glowing with soft blue lights, and the air felt crisp and clean, unlike anything he'd ever experienced. He looked out the window, seeing nothing but a vast stretch of blackness, dotted with sparkling stars. He could hardly believe it. He was in space. Lyra stood beside him, her presence calm and confident, as though this was nothing new to her. She seemed unaffected by the strange surroundings, her gaze focused on the path ahead. Jackson tried to speak, but his voice came out a little hoarse. "Where are we going?" he asked, still trying to process everything that had happened in such a short time. "We're going to my world, Syra," Lyra replied, her voice steady, but with a hint of urgency. "It's far from here, beyond the stars you can see. It's a place of great beauty, but also danger." Jackson's mind raced. He wanted to ask more questions about Syra, about the threat she mentioned, about why she chose him, but it was hard to focus. The reality of what was happening was overwhelming. He was just a regular guy, an engineer, someone who fixed broken machines for a living. Why would someone like him be needed in a galaxy-wide war? What did she mean by him having potential? Lyra seemed to sense his confusion. "I know this is hard to believe, but trust me," she said. "You have abilities within you that you've never tapped into. When I saw you on Earth, I knew you were the one who could help us." She paused, looking at him with eyes that shimmered with an intensity that made Jackson feel like she could see straight through him. "The fate of my people, and yours, rests on what you can do." Jackson swallowed hard, his thoughts a blur. The idea of him having hidden abilities sounded ridiculous. He had no powers. He was just a guy with a knack for fixing machines. Yet, Lyra's words stayed with him, her voice ringing in his ears. "You have potential." Hours passed as the ship continued its journey. Jackson spent the time in silence, his mind racing. Eventually, the ship's engines hummed with a different pitch, signaling that they were approaching their destination. Through the window, Jackson saw the first glimpse of Tyra, an alien planet, bathed in a soft, glowing light. It was unlike anything he had ever imagined. The planet was vast, with towering cities made of crystal-like structures that shimmered in the light of its two suns. The surface of Syra was a blend of vibrant colors, from the deep green forests to the bright blue oceans, all framed by mountains that seemed to stretch endlessly into the sky. The sky itself was a rich violet, dotted with swirling clouds that glowed faintly. Jackson stared in awe at the sight. He had never seen anything so breathtaking. As they descended toward the planet, Lyra turned to him. "This is Tyra, my home. It's a place of peace and knowledge, but that peace is threatened. We've been at war for years, and now a much darker force is coming." She hesitated, as if weighing how much to reveal. "The war will only end if we stop it, and I believe you're the key." Jackson wanted to argue, to say that he wasn't the hero she thought he was. But the intensity in her eyes stopped him. It wasn't just hope he saw there. It was something deeper, trust. She truly believed that he could do this. Before he could speak, the ship landed gently on the surface of Tyra. The air outside was cool and fresh, and as the hatch opened, a group of aliens, with sleek and graceful features, greeted them. They bowed slightly to Lyra, showing respect, and then turned their attention to Jackson. "Welcome to Syra," Lyra said, leading him out of the ship. "We have much to do. You must learn what you can do. It's time to unlock your potential." Jackson stepped off the ship, his legs unsteady, but there was no turning back now. He was on an alien world, surrounded by beings who believed in him, believed that he was the key to stopping a galactic war. His life had just taken a turn he couldn't even begin to understand. And somewhere deep down, despite the fear and uncertainty, a part of him couldn't help but feel that maybe, just maybe, this was where he was meant to be. Jackson couldn't shake the feeling that everything he knew about himself had been turned upside down. He had barely set foot on Syra, and already he was being swept into something far bigger than he could have ever imagined. The peaceful green world was beautiful, yes, but its serenity felt fragile, as if something dark was lurking just out of sight. Lyra led him through the city's bustling streets, where the inhabitants of Syra, graceful beings with pale, shimmering skin and long, flowing hair, greeted her with respect. They were taller than humans, their eyes glowing faintly like Lyra's, and their movements were fluid, almost like they were part of the very air around them. It was clear that they held a deep reverence for her. "We have much to prepare for," Lyra said, her voice low and serious. "The war is not just about strength. It's about understanding, harnessing the energy that flows through this universe. And that's where you come in, Jackson." She led him into a tall, crystalline building at the heart of the city. Inside, the walls seemed to hum with an energy Jackson couldn't quite understand. There were rooms filled with strange artifacts, scrolls covered in alien symbols, and glowing crystals suspended in the air. He felt a sense of wonder and awe, but also unease. Everything felt so otherworldly. They arrived at a large chamber at the center of the building, its floor made of translucent material that glowed with an inner light. In the middle of the room was a circular platform, surrounded by intricate symbols carved into the ground. Lyra gestured for Jackson to step onto the platform, her expression serious. "This is where your training will begin," she said. "Here, you will learn to unlock the power that lies dormant within you. You may not understand it now, but I promise it's there." Jackson stood uncertainly on the platform, looking around as Lyra moved to a console on the wall. She pressed a series of glowing symbols, and suddenly the room began to hum with energy. The air around him crackled, and he could feel a strange pull, like an invisible force drawing him in every direction at once. "Focus," Lyra's voice echoed in his mind, calm but commanding. "This is the first step. You have to connect with the energy around you, with the flow of the universe. Let it guide you." Jackson closed his eyes, trying to block out the overwhelming sensations. At first, all he could feel was the buzzing in his head, the strange pressure in the air, and the weight of his own doubt. He wasn't sure what he was doing, or if this was even real. But then, something began to shift. A warmth spread through his chest, and his mind started to clear. He could feel something. It was faint, but there. It was as though the energy Lyra spoke of was slowly starting to awaken within him. "You're doing it." Lyra's voice was barely a whisper now, but Jackson heard it as if she were standing right beside him. "The universe is alive with energy. It flows through everything. And you, Jackson, you can tap into it. You're not just an ordinary human. You are capable of so much more." For the next several hours, Jackson stood on the platform, trying to harness the strange power that seemed to pulse in the air around him. At first, he felt nothing but confusion. The energy seemed so distant, so unreachable. But as time went on, he began to feel it more clearly. The warmth in his chest grew, and the pressure in the air seemed to focus around him. He could almost hear the energy whispering to him, urging him to take control. When he finally opened his eyes, his hands were glowing with a soft, bluish light. He looked at them in shock, unable to comprehend what he was seeing. "You did it," Lyra said, a note of pride in her voice. "This is just the beginning, Jackson. You have the power to reshape this world, to change the course of this war, but you'll need to keep practicing, keep pushing yourself. There's so much more you can do." Jackson felt a surge of excitement, but also fear. What had just happened? What else could he do? And how could someone like him, an engineer from Earth, become powerful enough to face whatever danger threatened this world? "I'm not sure I'm ready for this," he admitted, the weight of responsibility settling heavily on his shoulders. "You will be," Lyra reassured him. "Trust in yourself and in the power within you. Together, we can save both our worlds." As she spoke, Jackson realized that this was no longer just about helping an alien race. This was about something much bigger. It was about protecting his home, his people, and the future of the universe itself. And despite his fear, He knew one thing for sure. He couldn't turn back now. Jackson's heart raced as he followed Lyra down the winding corridors of the training complex. His hand still glowed faintly from the energy he had managed to summon earlier, but the excitement he felt was quickly overshadowed by the fear of what lay ahead. Lyra's words echoed in his mind. "Together, we can save both our worlds." But right now, Jackson wasn't sure he had the strength, the skills, or the confidence to do any of that. Lyra seemed to sense his unease. "You've done well so far, Jackson. But the real challenge is yet to come. Your training will only grow more difficult from here, and you'll need to trust yourself more than ever before." Her voice was calm, almost comforting, but Jackson couldn't ignore the weight of her words. The real challenge. They stopped in front of a large metal door. The walls around them hummed with energy, and strange symbols glowed faintly beneath their feet. Lyra placed her hand on the door, and it opened with a soft hiss. Inside, the room was dark except for a small, floating orb of light in the center, casting eerie shadows on the walls. The air was thick with tension, and Jackson's pulse quickened as he stepped inside. "This is where you'll face your first trial," Lyra explained, her eyes serious. "You must face your fears head-on, Jackson. This trial will push you to your limits, but you will come out stronger for it." Before Jackson could ask what kind of trial it was, the orb in the center of the room flickered. Suddenly, the air around him seemed to warp, and the temperature dropped. A low growl echoed in the shadows, sending a chill through his spine. He turned quickly, but saw nothing. "Stay calm," Lyra's voice cut through the tension. "This is a trial of the mind, not the body. What you see, what you feel, it's all an illusion. Trust yourself." Jackson took a deep breath, trying to steady his racing heart. But as he stood in the center of the room, strange images began to form around him. He saw flashes of Earth, his family, his friends, his quiet life. But then, the images twisted. He saw a world in flames, cities falling, and people screaming. He saw himself standing by, helpless, as everything he cared about was destroyed. The illusion was so real, so vivid, that Jackson had to fight to stay grounded. His chest tightened, his thoughts scattered. "Is this what will happen? Is this my fault?" "Don't listen to the illusions." Lyra's voice was steady, but Jackson could hear the urgency in it. "This is your fear speaking to you. You must find the strength to overcome it." The images around him grew darker, more intense. He saw himself failing, seen as weak by the people of Syra, watched as they turned against him. His hands trembled as the images twisted into nightmarish shapes. The room felt suffocating, and he could hardly breathe. Jackson clenched his fists, trying to focus on Lyra's voice. She was right. This wasn't real. It couldn't be. But the fear in his chest, the dread pulling at him, made it hard to hold on to that thought. Just then, something within him stirred. The same warmth from his earlier training spread through his body, and for the first time, Jackson allowed himself to feel it, to embrace it. He had been fighting this fear, this doubt, but maybe that was the mistake. Maybe the way to defeat it was to accept it, to let the energy inside him flow freely, without resistance. The light in the orb flickered again, and the illusions around him began to dissolve. The air lightened, and the temperature returned to normal. Slowly, the shadows faded, leaving only silence behind. Jackson opened his eyes, blinking in surprise. The room was no longer threatening. There was no fire, no destruction, only the quiet hum of energy around him. He had done it. He had faced his fear and overcome it. Lyra stepped forward, her gaze proud. "Well done, Jackson. You've passed your first trial. But this is just the beginning. The challenges will grow harder, but so will you. Remember, the power within you is not just about strength. It's about overcoming the fears and doubts that hold you back." Jackson felt a sense of pride swell inside him. He had done it. He had faced the darkest parts of his mind and come out stronger, and for the first time since arriving on Xyra, he felt like he might actually be able to do what Lyra believed he could. There was still much to learn, much to face, but Jackson knew one thing for sure. He was ready, ready for whatever the future had in store. Jackson stood at the edge of the training arena, the sun of Xyra setting behind him, casting a golden glow over the landscape. He had come a long way since his first day on this strange world. His hands, once unfamiliar with the strange power Lyra had introduced him to, now pulsed with energy. The warmth he had first felt in the training chamber had grown stronger, more familiar. The power inside him was no longer an unfamiliar thing. It was part of him, an extension of his will. But with that power came responsibility, a weight he hadn't fully realized until now. The trials had been hard, but they were only the beginning. Lyra had told him there would be many more tests, and Jackson could feel the intensity growing in the air around him. The stakes were higher than ever. He turned to see Lyra approaching, her glowing eyes focused on him with a mix of pride and concern. "Today's challenge will be different," she said, her voice steady. "It's not just about power, it's about control. You will face an opponent, someone who will push you to your limits. But remember, it's not just about winning. It's about understanding your power and knowing when to use it." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. An opponent? He wasn't sure if he was ready for that. All the training had been focused on harnessing the energy within him, but controlling it. He had only just begun to understand what he could do. But Lyra's words echoed in his mind. It's not just about winning. It's about control. The arena was massive, a vast expanse of smooth stone surrounded by towering walls of crystal. In the center, a large circle was marked, and as Jackson stepped into it, he felt the air shift. It was as if the very atmosphere was charged with energy, waiting to be released. From the opposite side of the arena, a figure emerged, tall and imposing, with dark, metallic armor and glowing eyes. The warrior walked toward him with a calm, measured pace. Jackson couldn't help but feel a sense of dread. This was no ordinary opponent. This was someone who had spent years mastering their craft, someone who knew how to use the energy that Jackson was still learning to control. "This is Corin." Lyra's voice rang out, cutting through Jackson's growing anxiety. "Corin is one of the most skilled warriors on Xyra. He will test your ability to control your power, to fight without losing yourself in it." Jackson swallowed hard. He had no doubt that Corin was a formidable opponent, and the thought of facing someone so powerful made his chest tighten. But as the warrior closed the distance between them, Jackson took a deep breath, focusing on the warmth in his hands. He had to trust himself. He had to remember what Lyra had taught him. The moment Corin reached the center of the arena, the battle began. Without a word, he lunged forward, his movements fast and precise. Jackson barely had time to react, raising his hand to deflect the strike. The energy inside him flared to life, and with a surge of power, he sent Corin stumbling back. The force of the blast left Jackson breathless, but the warrior was already back on his feet, unfazed. Corin's next attack came in the form of a series of quick, devastating blows, each one harder to block than the last. Jackson struggled to keep up, his movements jerky and unsure. The energy inside him surged wildly, threatening to overwhelm him. He could feel it building in his chest, a pressure that felt impossible to contain. But then he remembered Lyra's words. Control, not power. Jackson took a deep breath, grounding himself. He focused on the energy inside, the warmth that had once seemed so foreign to him. He steadied his mind, and with a sudden clarity, he channeled the energy, directing it with precision. The next time Corin struck, Jackson was ready. He deflected the blow with ease, his own energy flowing smoothly, like water through a stream. The battle raged on, but Jackson felt a shift within him. He wasn't just fighting anymore. He was dancing with the energy, moving in sync with it. Every strike, every block, was an extension of his will. Corrin's attacks became slower, more predictable, as Jackson's control grew stronger. In the final moments, Jackson summoned the full force of his power. A wave of energy erupted from his hands, sending Corrin flying across the arena. The warrior landed with a heavy thud, but he didn't rise. The fight was over. Jackson stood, panting and exhausted, but triumphant. Lyra walked to his side, a proud smile on her face. "Well done, Jackson. You've proven you can control your power. But remember, this is just the beginning. True strength isn't about fighting. It's about knowing when not to." Jackson nodded, his chest swelling with pride. He had done it. He had taken control of the power inside him, and for the first time, he felt ready for whatever challenge came next. Jackson stood before Lyra, his body still buzzing with the energy from the battle he had just fought. The arena was quiet now, the air heavy with the weight of what had just happened. He had learned to control his power, to harness the incredible force inside him. But as he stood there, he couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this journey, something he still didn't understand. Lyra had been his guide so far, but now it felt like the time had come for him to learn the truth. Lyra's expression was unreadable as she looked at him, as if weighing something in her mind. Jackson's curiosity grew, and he felt the weight of her gaze pressing on him. "Lyra, there's something I need to know," Jackson said, his voice firm. "I've been training and fighting. But what is all of this for? Why am I here on Xira? What's really at stake?" Lyra took a deep breath, her usual calmness replaced by a rare moment of hesitation. She motioned for him to follow her, and they walked together to a quiet place by the crystal cliffs, overlooking the vast landscape of Xira. The view was breathtaking, but Jackson hardly noticed the beauty around him. His focus was entirely on Lyra, and the answers she would give. "You're right to ask," Lyra began, her voice soft yet heavy with meaning. "There is much you still don't know, but it's time you understood what you're truly fighting for." She paused, as if gathering her thoughts. Xira is not just a world of warriors and magic. It's a world that exists between many others, a world at the heart of the universe. And now, it's in danger. Jackson's mind raced. In danger from what? Lyra's eyes grew darker. From the Crescent Empire. Jackson had heard of the Crescent Empire. They were a race of ruthless conquerors, known for their vast armies and advanced technology. Their thirst for power had already wiped out entire civilizations across the galaxy. The thought of them coming to Xira, a place Jackson had come to care about, filled him with dread. "The Crescents are coming for this world," Lyra continued, "and they believe they can control the energy that flows through Xira, energy that, if harnessed, could give them the power to conquer not just this world, but every world connected to it, including Earth." Jackson's heart skipped a beat. Earth, his home. He had come to Xira as a stranger, confused and frightened, but now everything was becoming clear. The stakes were higher than he had imagined. "So, what does this have to do with me?" Jackson asked, his voice tight with emotion. "Why did you bring me here?" Lyra's gaze softened. "You were chosen because of your unique ability, Jackson. You're not just any human. You possess the rarest of gifts, the power to connect with the energy of the universe itself. This power is what the Crescents seek. They know that if they can capture you and break your connection to the energy, they will become unstoppable. And if they succeed, the balance of the entire universe will be lost." Jackson's mind reeled. He had never felt special. He had never imagined that he could be the key to something so enormous. The weight of the responsibility almost crushed him. Could he really be the one to stop the Crescents? Could he really protect Xira and Earth from their grasp? "I don't know if I'm ready for this," Jackson admitted, his voice trembling. I've only just learned to control my power. What if I fail? Lyra's expression softened, and she placed a reassuring hand on his shoulder. You are ready, Jackson. You've already proven that you have the strength and the heart to fight for what's right. But remember, you're not alone in this. You have allies, and you have the power of Sci-Fi itself on your side. Together, we can stop the Cretans and protect everything we hold dear. Jackson took a deep breath, his mind now clearer. The fear that had gripped him before began to fade, replaced by a sense of purpose. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone, his home, his world, and the people he had come to care about on Sci-Fi. I won't fail, Jackson said, his voice steady with resolve. I won't let them take this world, or mine. Lyra smiled, a look of pride in her eyes. I knew you would say that. Now, the real battle begins. We'll train you harder, prepare you for the war ahead. But we're not just fighting with strength, Jackson. We're fighting with our hearts, with everything we have. Jackson nodded, determination filling his chest. He was ready for whatever came next. The journey ahead would be long and difficult, but he wouldn't stop until Sci-Fi and Earth were safe. Together with Lyra, he would face the Cretan Empire and protect the universe from their tyranny. The moment Jackson stepped into the war chamber, a heavy silence hung in the air. The room, vast and imposing, was surrounded by glowing blue walls that flickered with ancient energy. Lyra stood beside him, her eyes focused on the large holographic map that hovered in the center of the room. It displayed not just Sci-Fi, but every neighboring planet, every star system connected to their world. The Cretan Empire's reach was terrifying. Their ships already moving closer, their armies preparing for the final assault. Jackson's heart pounded in his chest. This was it, the moment he had been preparing for. The moment when everything he had learned, every battle he had fought, would come together. Lyra had warned him that this was not going to be easy. It was the final trial before he could fully master the power that flowed through him. This trial wasn't just about his physical strength or his ability to control the energy inside him. It was about understanding the true depth of his connection to the universe itself. We have one chance at this, Lyra said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of what was to come. The Cretans are coming for Sci-Fi, and if they reach the heart of the world, they will destroy everything. This trial will prepare you for the coming battle. It's not about how much power you have, Jackson. It's about how well you can connect with the world around you. You have to become one with Sci-Fi's energy. Jackson nodded, though doubt still gnawed at him. He had spent so much time training, but nothing had truly prepared him for what he was about to face. Lyra was asking him to do the impossible, merge with Sci-Fi itself. He had barely begun to understand his own power, let alone tap into the energy of an entire planet. Lyra gestured for him to step forward, and the room seemed to shift around him. The walls of the chamber glowed brighter. The air became thick with a hum, almost as if the entire world was alive. Jackson closed his eyes, focusing on the warmth in his hands. He had felt this energy before, the heat, the surge, the flow. But now, it wasn't just coming from him. It was coming from everywhere, from every corner of Sci-Fi. It was in the stone beneath his feet, the air around him, the very ground that had supported him since his arrival. The energy swelled within him, and Jackson struggled to contain it. It was overwhelming, more than anything he had ever felt. But instead of fighting it, he let the power consume him. He allowed it to flood every part of his being, to fill every gap, every empty space. It wasn't just inside him now. It was everywhere. The planet itself was alive within him. He was a part of it, and it was a part of him. For a moment, Jackson felt like he was floating, suspended in the universe itself. He could feel the pulse of Sci-Fi, the rhythm of the planet's heart. The energy surged through him, like a river of light and power. It was beautiful, overwhelming, and frightening all at once. But Jackson didn't resist. He surrendered to it, letting it guide him. The holographic map in the center of the room flickered, and Jackson's mind was pulled into the images on the screen. He saw the Crescent ships closing in on Xyra, their fleets dark and menacing. He saw the battle ahead, the destruction, the chaos that would come if he failed. But he also saw something else, an opening, a weak point in the Crescent fleet, a path that could lead to their ultimate defeat, and he knew, without a doubt, that this was the way to end it. With a deep breath, Jackson focused all of his energy on the path he had seen, willing the power of Xyra to guide his every move. He wasn't just using the energy anymore, he was letting it use him. The walls of the chamber seemed to respond to his thoughts, shifting and changing with every motion of his mind. The entire room was alive with the energy of the planet, as if the very ground was working with him, guiding him toward victory. Lyra watched him closely, her eyes filled with a mix of hope and fear. She knew this trial was not just a test of Jackson's abilities, it was a test of his heart. If he could harness the energy of Xyra, if he could become one with the planet, he would be ready for the battle ahead. But if he failed, it would mean the end of everything. For a brief moment, everything fell silent. The hum of energy faded, and Jackson stood still, his body glowing with the light of Xyra itself. He had done it. He had merged with the planet's energy, harnessing its power as his own. Lyra stepped forward, her eyes wide with awe. "You did it, Jackson," she said softly. "You've become one with Xyra. You're ready for the battle." Jackson took a deep breath, his heart still racing. The final trial was over, but the real battle was just beginning. She had been with him through every challenge, every trial, and now it all came down to this moment. The fate of Xyra and the future of their worlds depended on Jackson's ability to control the power he had harnessed. He had learned to connect with the energy of Xyra, but now he had to wield it, to use it to protect everything he had come to care about. The Crescent forces had landed, their armored soldiers marching across the land with ruthless precision. They were preparing to breach the city, to take the heart of Xyra and claim the planet for their own. But Jackson was ready. He could feel the planet's energy coursing through him, filling him with strength and clarity. He wasn't just fighting for himself anymore. He was fighting for everyone who called Xyra home. "You're ready for this," Lyra said, her voice steady despite the gravity of the situation. "Trust in what you've learned. The power of Xyra is with you." Jackson nodded, his gaze fixed on the Crescent soldiers advancing toward them. The energy inside him hummed, ready to be unleashed. He raised his hands, and the ground beneath him trembled. In an instant, the power of Xyra responded. The very earth seemed to come alive, the plants and rocks pulsing with energy. With a single motion, Jackson sent a wave of power crashing toward the advancing army, knocking them off their feet. The Crescents, taken off guard, struggled to regain their footing, but Jackson wasn't done yet. He focused, channeling the energy around him. The sky above darkened as lightning crackled in the air, and the ground shook beneath his feet. The full force of Xyra's energy flowed through him, more intense than he had ever felt it before. He felt unstoppable. He could feel the power of the planet bending to his will, and for the first time, he understood what it meant to truly be one with Xyra. The Crescent soldiers regrouped, their leaders issuing commands through the chaos. They were not easily defeated, but they had underestimated the power of the planet and the strength that Jackson now commanded. He raised his arms again, and the earth rumbled in response. Massive walls of stone and energy rose from the ground, trapping the enemy forces in a cage of solid rock and crackling energy. Lyra watched from the sidelines, her heart racing with pride and fear. Jackson had become something more than she had ever hoped for, a warrior with the power of a planet at his fingertips. But the battle was far from over. The Crescent leaders had yet to make their move, and Jackson knew that their true strength was still to come. Suddenly, a massive figure appeared on the battlefield. The leader of the Crescent forces, a towering figure clad in dark armor, stepped forward. His eyes glowed with a cold, predatory light. He was the true threat, the one who had orchestrated the invasion of Tyra. His presence was overwhelming, and Jackson could feel the darkness radiating from him. "You think you can stop me?" The Crescent leader's voice boomed, echoing through the battlefield. "You are nothing more than a child playing with fire." Jackson's heart raced, but he stood his ground. He had come this far. He had faced the impossible, and he would not let this enemy take everything he had fought for. With a fierce determination, he gathered the energy of Syra one last time, focusing every ounce of his power on the Crescent leader. The two locked eyes, and in that moment, the battlefield went silent. The wind stopped blowing, the sky darkened, and the world seemed to hold its breath. Then, with a burst of energy, Jackson launched himself forward, his hands crackling with the raw power of Tyra. The ground beneath him exploded as he collided with the Crescent leader, sending shockwaves rippling through the battlefield. The two clashed with a force that shook the very foundations of Tyra. Energy crackled around them, the planet itself responding to the battle. Jackson felt every inch of his body straining with the effort, but he refused to give in. He pushed forward, using the power of the planet to fuel his every move. With one final surge of energy, he struck the Crescent leader down, shattering his armor and sending him crashing to the ground. The Crescent forces, now leaderless, faltered. Without their commander, they had no direction, no will to fight. The remaining soldiers retreated, and the battle was won. Jackson stood victorious, breathing heavily but unbroken. The sky above cleared, and the energy of Cyrus swirled around him in a brilliant display of light. He had done it. He had saved Syra, and with it, the future of all their worlds. Lyra approached him, her eyes filled with awe. "You did it, Jackson," she whispered. "You're the hero Syra needed." Jackson smiled, his heart full of pride. But he knew this was only the beginning. The universe was vast, and there would always be more battles to fight. But for now, he could rest knowing that he had protected the world he had come to love.